how how is it covering stuff like Black Lives Matters, the movement within Alhambra? Is there do you get a sense that it is an issue here in Alhambra, or do you feel like it's just trying to support, or is it just supporting the cause?
Yeah, we've in Alhambra, at Alhambra Source, we have been looking for links between the George Floyd protests
Mm-hmm.
and the Black Lives Matters movement. That we see a really heavy presence over in downtown LA and more like central Los Angeles, even East LA. That's where I live now, and there are demonstrations over here at Mariachi Plaza every weekend. Um, so I do think that Alhambra doesn't really have that presence yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I say this, and literally last Wednesday, a local Alhambra High School's graduating senior
Mm-hmm.
organized a march from Almanzar Park to Alhambra City Hall. It was it was Wednesday afternoon. Summer had
Mm-hmm.
just began, and everybody felt it.
Mm-hmm.
And this student had wanted to just voice his support of the Black Lives Matter movement. He wanted to voice his support against racial inequality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually great that him and a small group of friends decided to organize a meeting at Almanzar Park, and we had talked to him the day before. It was only supposed to be 15 people,
Mm-hmm.
but the day of the event, 200 people ended up marching from Almanzar Park to City Hall. And I just think that, like, wow, that's so impressive that this these kids, just orchestrated this little grassroots, demonstration, and it ended up being pretty darn successful. So although Alhambra doesn't really have like a big presence in terms of
Mm-hmm.
I guess demonstrating solidarity or support of the Black Lives Matter movement, I think is developing for sure.
Yeah. You hit something that I've been noticing across the nation, is that a lot of these movements are starting from students, that not just from colleges, but like from the high school level. And I
Yeah.
think my hope and understanding is that like maybe that should continue. Like these, what I've noticed with working with high school students, that like if you talk to them as if they're adults, like they'll be willing to stand up for things that are wrong in their community and say something about it. So I think that that's kind of like a greater movement, and I think it's like it's probably a built up since all of this coronavirus, the COVID-19 things, and I think there's this collective kind of um viewing yourself on the inside, and like
Yeah.
understanding like why in a span of 2 or 3 weeks all of these racial subjects are coming to the forefront, and then George Floyd happens, and that's the spark that like ignites the fire.
Mhm.
And I think now we need, I think as a nation, to really consider how we talk about racism in the high schools, and all those things. And I I just realized I'm having a rambling conversation, but I guess that's why we're doing this podcast.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think I've personally felt that I've been
Mhm.
rambling by myself in my own head
Mhm.
since George Floyd's death. Just thinking about what does it mean
Mhm.
exactly? What does this movement mean? What's my contribution to fighting racial inequality as somebody who lives here, the San
Mhm.
Gabriel Valley? How can I support, or what could I do? You got me. Yeah, now I'm rambling here. I've asked myself questions like this multiple times, and I don't think anybody's really gotten a satisfying answer.
Mhm.
But folks are acting, and things are getting done.
Mhm.
Um, so that is really exciting, and I think youth organization is a big part of that.
Yeah, and all of these actions, like, you know, I think Garcetti in LA is trying to move funding away from police and into social services like housing and you know, mental health and all of those things. And I think that that's kind of positive action going into a positive way. Um, and then this whole movement of defund the police, which, you know, I do have family members that and friends that are, you know, do serve in public service in terms of firefighting and police and in the armed forces. But I feel for me personally, it's like trying to grapple with what that means. And then when I see the budget of LA, it's like seeing how much money gets allocated to police versus housing or things that would fix the problem from the ground up versus using police to always fix the problem for you. So I think it's going in the right directions, but it's just there's some other stuff that I'm so bothered by, in the sense that's like the when on a national level, I'm weird about talking about politics, but on a national level, when Pelosi made the announcement of what they're doing on the Democratic side, but wearing African kente scarves, I'm like, okay, you could have just made the announcement, but it's a weird thing when they bring these scarves out of nowhere. I'm like, what is going on here? And I'm just like, it's yeah, it's just kind of weird. But well, what is your personal take on kind of the this whole defund the police stance?
Yeah, it's yeah, my take is sort of changing every day. If you asked me 2 weeks ago what I thought about defund the police, I would have said, like, oh my God, like, what is this really something that we want as a community? Are we sure that we want to go there? Because I didn't quite understand what that phrase meant, defund the police. I didn't understand. Like, immediately, I think people see that on a sign or hear their friend or hear somebody yelling it down the street, and to them it means, to someone who is not aware of what it means, it might mean, okay, you know, no more cops, no more public safety, no more, you know, there's gonna, people just jump into, like, worst case scenario. People think that, you know, there's going to be a murdering rampage if we get rid of the police department. There's going to be, you know, more domestic violence cases. There's the world's just going to go wild. But I think you and I saw that same infographic about the LA County or the LA City budget, and it's the amount that the police department gets in terms of funding versus education or other social services is really drastic. And I'm still figuring out exactly what defund the police means, but I've heard a lot of great activists and scholars help me understand what it means. And to them, it's not like a, you know, it doesn't mean defunding public safety or social services. It's a reinvestment in those services. It's a reallocation of funds that really focus on like you said, on funding those services from the ground up, instead of relying on police officers who, although have training and although have careers, you know, long careers of talking to people on the ground and helping people on the ground, you know, might not be the best qualified to, what's the word I'm looking for? Diffuse conflicts between people.
Yeah. So for folks that don't know, I wrote this down in my notes, is that defund the police is a divestment of the police force in the United States cities and a refocus on funding and prevention, mental health, and other public services. And so, and you said it from the beginning that, like, most people that hear something like defund the police go quickly into what does that, like the Fox News talking heads points of like there's going to be chaos in the streets, and I saw family members posting a Tucker Carlson thing where his hot take was that it will just bring everything into chaos, and I'm like, wow, I'm just like, you're taking this phrase from a movement so literally without really looking about an inch lower and trying to understand what does that mean. and and
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of communities and a lot of places in the US that would probably need some alternatives to police, because if there is like a generation that generation after generation that has this view of police as a negative, you know, like there's got to be some kind of fundamental change in a city system to say like, you know, this has to stop. We need to figure out solutions instead of more policing, you know.
Yeah, and to add on to that, to the defund the police movement, a lot of folks are criticizing the ways that taxpayer money, that thing goes into the police departments, is used once it's there in their budget. For example, the current chief of the LAPD, um, the LA Times did investigate a piece on him because he had retired.
Mm-hmm.
I think he had retired from the role of assistant chief, and he got a payout of, I believe, 1.6 million. 6 months later, he was then instated as the chief of police now of LAPD. So, and now he's definitely getting, getting a paycheck, and is definitely getting benefits, and is
Mm-hmm.
definitely, getting all that money. So what happened to the 1.6 million is what a lot of activists are, questioning. Like, should that's money that could have gone to social services. That's
Yeah.
money that could have gone to mental health. That's money that could have gone to education. So there are a lot of critiques on what police departments use their money on.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it goes towards court, protecting policemen in court cases. When there are those police brutality suits, it goes towards settling a lot of their crimes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there are a lot of issues, but I'm learning every day.
Yeah,
And it's
I feel like I'm learning every day too. I went to my workplace and we were making these boxes and bags to give the families of food and, you know, provisions, because, you know, we're still, even though we're very focused on racism and police brutality at this moment, coronavirus is still a thing. And
yeah.
families still need to be fed. And so I was working, and at the office there, someone told me that, oh, Alhambra PD has like a due diligence kind of program for the community. And I'm like, okay, I've worked with students at Alhambra High School, and I've worked closely with the mayor at one point, and all of those things. It's like, why is this the first time I'm hearing this? uh, Part of it probably is that I don't technically work closely with the police department in Alhambra, but I'm like, well, if there's something like this, like a due diligence unit at like Alhambra, like why am I just hearing this now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not too familiar with what a due diligence
Honestly,
is.
I had no idea what that meant either, and I think they had wasn't sure what that meant for them too.
Mm.
So I, you know, at best, I think I probably need to ask them what does that mean. This could be probably a community engagement eh, for Alhambra maybe, or understandings like what's the role of the police in that city. So I'm
Mm.
not sure. Like I live like a couple cities away from Alhambra. I get bussed into the Alhambra school district, so that's why I really care what happens in that city. So
Mm.
um, and plus I like shopping around that area anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The food,
so
of course.
that is very true. coming back to the whole community aspect, there is while reading this Forbes article on what defund the police movement is, they cite this nonprofit called Kahoot, which is crisis assistance helping out in the on the streets. And I just I just thought it was interesting is that like this organization back in '89 have been operating in the Oregon area to make an alternative to what police do in the streets, you know. And I think now that they're considering expanding to, you know, Minneapolis and other areas of general, uh, not general, but like areas where police brutality has been historically an issue. So, but I had this conversation with my coworkers, like, yeah, this does sound good, but like, does a blanket? I think my point is like, does a blanket solution help with all cities? You know, like what
Hmm.
works for one city may not necessarily work for another. And I feel and I hope that a solution can be made within the city level and within people that live in those cities. You know, like, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I do definitely think that that what may work for, you know, a small rural town in Michigan might not work for Alhambra, for example.
Hmm.
The ethnic makeup of both communities would be really different. The needs of the communities might be different. Definitely population difference. So I do like the more one-to-one on the ground version of shaping services for communities.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the work that that you do, Brian, with the AYC, Asian Youth Center, speaks to, you know, a local organization identifying what needs what the needs of the community are,
Hmm.
and then boom, delivering those needs.
Yeah.
Versus like relying on, you know, some other city chairman to, you know, tell us what we need. I think yeah.
Yeah, like trying to dictate how things ought to be than what the reality is with the population, you know.
Mm,
um and just to kind of like I think we're still going to be around this kind of police brutality and what's been happening around. But you gave me a link just last night that it takes about 6 to 9 months to just become a police officer, according to the LAPD recruitment website. And I think that's, you know, I think that's probably the most craziest thing to see is like, why does it only take 6 to 9 months to just become an officer when I think most occupations has like year like years just to be considered a professional, you know.
definitely, definitely, yeah. If you want to be like my friend's studying to be a high school counselor, and
Hmm.
he got his bachelor's in 4 years, and now he's in going to UC San Francisco, and he is getting he's in a 2-year program, so
Hmm.
it's 6 years before he's gonna even begin to be able to do some of his, I believe, hours. I think there are hours on top of that schooling that you need to do before you fully get the
It's like
certification.
like a residency almost.
You know,
Probably.
I'm not quite sure. All I know is that it takes over 6 years
Oh, okay.
for
Okay.
sure, with, like, you know, the bachelor's and the master's
Hmm.
program.
Yeah.
But
It's like,
there,
oh, sorry. I was gonna say it's like being a doctor or a medical profession. It takes years to even do that. And I was gonna say, granted, like yeah, there is the Explorers program that starts on the high school level, but you know,
mm,
if you get a
yeah.
situation where someone can only like from day one to all the way into 6 to 9 months, it's like become an officer. I'm like, okay, how am I gonna trust this officer?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. And I think that organization you mentioned earlier in Oregon, Kahoot, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think they sort of work like as, like community officers that are made up of EMTs and social workers and therapists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those professions have years of training versus a local PD officer. But yeah,
Yeah.
I, yeah, I say this, and I have friends and family who are really close to me, who are police officers,
Mm-hmm.
and I I love them. I love them. I really do, and I'm not like criticizing their role at all. But yeah, I do think that a certain type of training is necessary to diffuse certain types of situations.
Yeah. And from my point, it's like, as you may know, I'm Cambodian American, and ergos, most Cambodian Americans' first businesses are donut shops, and I think as the Cambodian community, we always like try to rely on the police, but I can't imagine if say for example in this case, if I do rely on the police for the safety of my business, right? If I do call the police and then the person dies, it's like that's
Uh,
like I would feel um like so much pain at that point. I'm like,
mm,
by me calling this police presence to take care of a situation, I'm like, and that led to someone's death. I'm like, I can't believe I just did that, like I I would feel as much guilty as those officers that are like, just standing by, you know what I mean? And I can't imagine
yeah.
what the owner of that cup food is feeling, it's just I just kind of imagine that.
That's is that the cup food, the store that George Floyd was killed in front of?
Yeah, I believe so.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder what they're thinking. Wow.
yeah, and I believe they're of Middle Eastern North African descent. So,
Mm,
so how much you know the movement is going to start moving the hate towards that angle, because like I did notice that there are some people of misguided um with not the best intentions, are super against the Hmong community in Minnesota. You know what I mean? And I was just
mm,
like, it's not the Hmong community that's doing this. It's the police. It's a problem within the police, and it's just ensuing the problems of dividing people, and it's
mhm.
not going down to the point of what is the issue. And that it's just my confidence in what the leadership on the very top is saying, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah, and I feel like I would probably voice my frustrations in a bit, but it's just so weird that we try to talk about the virus and reporting and conspiracies, but I think we did kind of cover a little bit of each of that. But with everything that happened with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, I think that needed to take more precedent, at least now, and I think my hope in the next coming weeks and months is to kind of like have a continued conversation about how cities and educators and civic leaders can be part of the solution um, to systemic racism and policing, and like how to be more equitable in a society almost. It's like if this can happen to an American, like this is how I contextualize it for conservatives. I said, this police officer did this to another American, and if you think that that's wrong, you should feel that way. Like it should be something that shouldn't happen. Like if that happens, that's lean on to the idea of like that is a police state. If a police officer can do that and get immunity and like basically be exonerated from any wrongdoing, and
mm,
I think the thing is like, just because, you know, he's of African American descent, is like the people are contextualizing, saying that he's, you know, he's already a criminal. But like, why would, my stance has always been, sure, if you want to talk about his past, I guess that's okay, but at the same point, like, why would the suspicion of passing a forgery be a death sentence for somebody? Why would that, why does that sound like justice to somebody? Like, if, you know, like, why would running in a local city make you suspicious for other people? Why would being at the wrong address in the wrong time be a death sentence for somebody else? Like, I just can't, I can't fathom, like, these are Americans that are being killed, you know, from police officers. That should scare you way more. I don't know. I think part of me is like, that's appealing to their own kind of sense of right and wrong. So I don't know. Maybe diving deep into that is not the best thing to do either.
Yeah, but you pose really good questions. Why did it happen? Why was George Floyd killed in public, on camera, and next to his peers, next to people standing by? Those are questions that the nation's trying to answer right now, and it's inspiring a lot of people. So I don't think it will go. I don't think his death will be in vain. We're talking about it here. His death overtook your show, an SGV based podcast. You know, his death is having a ripple effect, and it's wonderful that you and I, you know, people of color but still non-black, are like devoting this much time to talk about it. And it's great. I'm trying to be positive, trying to look at the good side.
I hope for you know, being the optimist I am. It's like hoping for the best, you know, like if there's any indication, the 50,000 people march in Hollywood, you know, mostly peaceful, like the peaceful protests after everything that's been happening with the riot and the looting. It's like, if that's indication of like this movement will continue, you know what I mean? This is more than just looting and rioting and all of those things that are happening right now. So I think that's positive. Yeah, real quick before we sign off, like,
sure.
Where can people find you?
Sure. So you could find me at Alhambra Source, and I work for